Hey there, members of the Night Crew, and folks who just love horror. Welcome to the Night Crew podcast, the podcast where we get cozy with the creepy, the frightening, and the just plain undead. I'm your host, Brad Ricks. On today's episode, I sat down with author B.D. Prince. We talk about his writing journey to include his journey from comedy to horror, his inspirations, finding time to write, and some insights on his screenwriting, especially the now award-winning screenplay, Boondocks. We also delve into what his favorite horror creature is, which he actually knows what the fear is called. Let's jump into my virtual studio, shall we? All right, so today I am joined in my virtual studio with B.D. Prince. B.D., how's it going?
It's going great. How are you, Professor Van Helsing?
I am doing well. This is it's going to be a fun little interview. You make number 2 for me, so I think I'm slowly getting the hang of it. We'll see how it goes.
Number 2. I'm number 2.
There you go. All right. So starting off, I'll kind of give that wonderful question that, all writers and everything always get, which is tell me about your writing career. How long have you been doing it? What was some of your first books and what made you want to become a writer?
I can remember wanting to be a writer since like the 3rd grade, to be honest with you. And the very first story I remember writing was a creative writing assignment. And, most kids, they're just like pulling their hair out, and wailing, gnashing of teeth, and I'm asking the teacher, can I do 5 pages? Instead of like one side or front and back. Yeah. And it was about a vampire. I remember the ending where he was either pushed off or forced off of a roof or a second story window and land on this wrought iron gate with the points on top, and it impaled him and he died. So that was exciting. But yeah, I mean,
it's monstrous. It's almost a very Monster Squad-ish ending.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was a long time. It's actually before Monster Squad, which dates me a little bit. But anyway, so yeah, that was kind of the first thing. And I've just always been drawn to horror. I had an older brother, 4 years older, who warped me at a really young age. So that was good. As far as writing, I actually got started writing comedy. My first paid sales, I guess you call them professional sales, was writing greeting cards, humorous greeting cards. And then I did some freelance writing. I wrote some one-liners for Joan Rivers, the comedian, if anybody remembers her. And so I started really kind of pursuing screenwriting and writing for television at first. I had a sketch comedy show on regional cable at one point. And then I moved to California to pursue screenwriting and to get a tan. And then, life happens, you get married, you have kids, and then you have to have a serious day job to pay the bills. That's more consistent. But, I still had that passion for storytelling. And so I finally, how does you wake up one day and you're like, wow, as Pink Floyd says, 10 years have got behind you. And so but the whole time I was still write down the ideas that would come into my head. So I had tons and tons of files. And so I decided, I'm just going to try and put some stuff out there, and I started publishing in some various anthologies and just kind of went on from there. So
you started with comedy, but now you're writing horror. So how do you make the jump from comedy to horror?
That's an excellent question, because they are very similar when you think about it. So in comedy, you have the build-up and then you have the punchline, right? In horror, you have the build-up, but then you have the scare. So the mechanics are very, very similar. It's just what emotion are you trying to evoke, right? Is it laughter or is it a blood-curdling scream, hopefully? But combining the two is actually quite a challenge. Again, even though the mechanics are very similar, you have to be very careful that one doesn't step on the other. So an example is I had one screenplay that's actually a finalist for an award at the upcoming Imaginarium convention in Louisville. I think it's the July 19th, 20th, 21st, that weekend. And I had one scene that, it's in the woods. It's called Boondocks. And in the woods, you got these creatures that are this creature that's converging on someone. And, it's just like, oh, in my head, it's so terrifying and everything. But I have a comic relief character in there. And so as I'm getting some first readers look at it, the horror part was not landing because I stepped in too early with the comedy. And so it basically just dispelled the horror. And so that was a real learning experience to say like, oh, okay. All right. Again, it's great to have that, you're terrified, but then of course you have to pull back a little bit so that the audience can breathe. But if you step in too soon or the two of them kind of collide, then you're going to lose one or both.
Interesting. So do you find in a lot of your writing, do you end up doing a little of that kind of cross-pollinating almost between comedy and horror?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's the character themselves that are kind of quirky and kind of in a humorous way. A lot of it's in dialogue where, you'll have something funny that'll again, a lot of times you have one character who's kind of a bit of a comic relief, but that's one of the things that I can't help myself because that's just who I am. So there are times where I have to go back and go, yeah, I got to pull that back a bit, or just take that all together because again, this story is supposed to be really grim and almost relentless. And it's like, you better not do it. I'll pull that comedy bit out.
Well, I know
killing your darlings, you know how that goes.
Oh, yes. Well, I know one thing that I've noticed too, though, if you have a character that is more kind of has that more comedic outlook, like the audience tends to kind of relate almost or root for that character. So then if something bad happens to them, you can almost get a more guttural reaction from your audience because something happened to the character they love because it has that kind of comedic slant to him.
Yeah. If you can build up that empathy and, a good way to get your reader to sympathize or empathize with your character is to make them, either feel sorry for them or just make them really likable. And, when you're laughing with somebody, from an empathetic standpoint, you're laughing with them, right? So their laughs make you laugh, which makes you happy. And then when something terrible happens to someone you like, then that's where you kind of pull the rug out and you get that shock factor, which I love, that little twist of the knife.
A little twist of the knife right at the end. Awesome. All right. So how do you find time to write?
That is the biggest challenge. The discipline and finding the time to write. I currently have a job which has weird hours. I work 12-hour days. It's 3 days 1 week, 4 days the next week. But they're 12-hour days. What the downside is, that day I really have nothing left. By the time I come home, shower, dinner, and that, sometimes I can force myself to get in, maybe an hour if I'm lucky. But usually I'm just so wasted that it's just they're dead days. But on the days I have off, then it's like, wow, I have a lot of extra free time to do that. And that's one of the things that attracted me to this job, even though it's soul sucking and I hate it. It does provide me with that. But I do have to also work every other weekend, which really bites when you're trying to schedule events, signing events, book events. I have to always pull out my calendar to see, am I free that day, or am I going to have to take a day off, vacation day or day without pay? So that really helps. One of the best recommendations I would give is to just, if you can try and be consistent for one thing. And if you can pick a time where you show up and you kind of get your brain used to always showing up at that time, even though, you may be not feeling it, when you sit down at that time, your brain knows this is writing time. And of course, cutting out the distractions, which is also hard. If you're married and have kids, especially, or just, whatever. Being able to, if you can have a writing room where you can close the door, that's great. Again, not always possible, but also all those little moments add up, right? And this, that if you try and think of the daunting task of putting together an entire novel or an entire screenplay, you're having to create a world out of nothing, right? And it's just so daunting. But if you can, as they say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? if you can get those little nibbles here and there, where even if it's just a bit of dialogue or a scene or an image, something like that, and write it down. So again, with my current job, I get breaks throughout the day. And so what I've tried to do is on my phone, write a little something, So it's like I got a 45-minute break or an hour break, It's like, let me leverage that instead of just doom scrolling through social media. If I can just, get a paragraph in, and then over time it accumulates. And next thing you know, again, you can piece that all together and now you have something.
Yeah. And I definitely understand the whole, like, having a routine to get yourself kind of into the mindset. I mean, humans, we're creatures of habit. So if you can kind of train yourself to, with a certain routine to kind of get into that mindset. I know mine, I come into my office, I usually have the light off. I have a candle that I usually light. So, get some of that, the sensory stuff. There's a playlist I put on, and, just that starts kind of getting me into that kind of that mindset. It's just part of that routine. And once you get there, then it's like everything kind of unlocks.
So you write the music?
No, I write to music usually. Yes, it's not. So it's more like melancholy piano kind of stuff, and so it's usually very more classical. Nothing with words. If I listen to something with words, I get to sing it along, and then I have zero productivity at that point.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's either classical music or, again, some type of mood music or just white noise, right? Like currently I just went on YouTube and searched under white noise, and it's like 10 hours of white noise that I just put on. And again, it kind of blocks out, the TV in the other room, or again, those distractions outside. And so, if I have words too, I'm born and raised in South Detroit. I'm like, no, stop. I can't sing along. I can't do that. If you got words, forget it. They're going to come in my head and I can't.
Yeah. I'm the exact same way. Yeah. There's usually, it's like two different playlists on Apple Music that I listen to. There's one that is called Melancholy Piano. There's one that's called Dark Academia. And both those they're all pretty much just classical music, but everything has that very minor undertone to it. And so that minor key undertone. So it's all very dark and brooding sounds. And so it matches with writing horror just perfectly. So it helps to be a good underlying soundtrack for the books.
Well, it's great, to set the mood like that. I was listening to Nox Arcana is a band that does like sometimes almost like circus carnival music at times and stuff like that. But then every once in a while they would throw in, the sideshow talker, the barker out there saying, "Oh," and he starts talking. I'm like, no words.
Fast forward.
Or the commercial, if you're listening to free iHeartRadio or something like that, and all of a sudden a commercial comes in, and you're like, oh,
dang it. So. All right. So where do you usually find your inspiration?
That's also a great question. I like the way you put that. Where do you get your inspiration instead of where do you get your ideas? Where do your ideas come from? Like there's some idea store that you go to, or there's somewhere on the
dark big web bag I keep right next to me. And, that's where I pull out all the ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Well, see, I summon this muse. Okay. So there's this, certain writ that I came across from the 1500s that I can summon the muse. It will feed me. I mean, sometimes, it can get a little painful, but, with the little bloodletting and so on. But then, there's the idea and it's so worth it.
It comes, but it's great at that point.
And I've actually had, again, I never thought, you think it was kind of like a cliche, I was like, where do you get your ideas, But I've literally had people ask me that, like, they just don't have the ideas. And for me, it just comes naturally. I mean, I just have a warped imagination. So these things pop in my head. But I guess the best answer is it's all around you, right? It's just how you look at that. And also some of those connections. So, sometimes it's just like a word or phrase. Right. So and it's kind of cool, too. So I have a short story collection that should be dropping in September timeframe. And so at the end of each short story, I'm actually writing a short bonus tracks, if you want to look at it that way, that says this was my inspiration for this. And there's a couple of them where it was just a phrase like "will work for food." When I was living in California, you're coming off an exit ramp, and there's always a homeless person there, with their little handwritten cardboard sign or whatever. And then it just kind of hit me. I'm like, would he really just work for food? And what would happen if some, crotchety old tightwad, decided to put him to the test? Will you really work for food? And, how hard will you work for it? And what would you do for food, just to eat? And then that spawned a short story. The latest one that I'm just finishing up and I'm now going to edit is the last short story for the collection, is called Wiggle Room. And so just that phrase, wiggle room, it's like, what does that mean? And then it sparked a memory from when I was a child that I was on vacation on the East Coast, my mom's side of the family. And we were like somewhere rural, like Virginia, Pennsylvania, whatever. And my grandpa, again, they were going to go fishing, and they stopped off at this to get some bait. And they literally had a worm farm. And it was the creepiest thing because they had this old weathered shack that you open the door and it's all dark and shadowy and cool. You walk inside, and then he had these like electrical probes going into the ground. And when he flips the switch, electricity surges into the ground, and then all of a sudden, all these night crawlers start wriggling and writhing to the surface, for him to pick up, and it was just horrific.
If that's not good inspiration, I don't know what is.
Yeah, scarred me as a kid, man, and still haunts me to this day. And then, of course, my mind put those two together, and with Wiggle Room, I'm like, yeah, that is the Wiggle Room, right? And then, I went off from there in a warped direction, and so this is a really fun story that's going to really make you squirm, if you'll excuse the pun there. But so yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just a word or phrase that you just look at it in a different way or connect it to something else. Other times it's I'm sure you've experienced this too, where you're kind of in that hypnagogic state when you're just waking in the morning or just going to bed at night, and you're kind of freeing your mind. And sometimes it's your subconscious, feeding you information, or just in the shower, with the white noise, where suddenly, your mind is free and you come up with ideas. And other times it's just like, again, in your travels. My upcoming novel was inspired. As soon as I finished the short story collection, I'm working into a novel where I was on my way to work in the morning, and there was a house that was tented for termites, right? And then I look over there like, oh, look, the circus is in town. And I started thinking like, what would happen if the next morning I go to leave, there's another tent, but it's a house closer to mine. And then the next day there's another tent, and they're getting closer and closer to my house. And what's going to happen if my house gets tented? And so then, I went down a really interesting path with that. And so I'm really excited. It's really an idea that I've had for, easily 15 years. And I've just been, as ideas come up, I keep putting it into that. To now, it's the point where the goal is to write a trilogy with a spin-off series from that. But it all started with looking at a termite, a tented house for termites, and then letting my warped imagination skew that. And then, again, and if all goes well, a trilogy and a spin-off series from that.
Yeah, I don't remember what author I was listening to or reading, whatever. And they said where they kind of get inspiration, it's just the randomest thing. Like if you are out walking and you see a key laying on the ground, then just ask yourself, why is that key on the ground? And just by that question of why, suddenly, just let your imagination start running wild on why is it there? What could it be? What door does this open? And like suddenly you just have, a whole story just builds off of nothing more than just asking the question why.
Yes. Why or what would happen if?
Yeah. The why or the what if.
But yeah, what does that unlock? That would be my first. Again, I'd see a key that's where my mind would go. It's like, wonder what this unlocks, And so is it something in the ground, Is it is there a door somewhere that I'm going to find? Is it I come across a tree and there's a keyhole, What there's just, to be able to let your mind wander like that. I love that.
Right. And that's just where the inspiration of where things come from is just those little things, just like that. It's, from the mustard seed grows the tree, so.
And they're little innocuous things too that, the average person would just walk right past that and not think about that. But when your mind is as twisted as ours are, Brad, they can go in some pretty dark directions.
So very true.
But I mean that in the best of a way. That's a compliment.
I take it. I wrote a whole book that has short story that has nothing to do with, taking Hallmark Christmas movies and making them all demented. So, I
love it.
So, all right. So what do you find is the most difficult part of writing a book?
The writing.
That summed it up.
I come across people that are spectacular writers. I mean, they can, spin a phrase and it's just poetry, right? But they don't have anything, I don't say interesting, but anything new, anything novel to bring to the table. And a lot of time, it's like, I'm sure you're reading through an anthology or something, you read through a story and it's like, wow, the journey was beautiful. But at the end, you don't arrive anywhere. And it's like, what was the point of that story? I don't see, there was like no takeaway, and there was not even really like a good arc to it, whatever. It's just like almost a day in the life or a moment in time. It's like the writing's enjoyable, but by the time you get to the next story, you've already forgotten it. So anyway, so the easy part for me is actually the ideas, because again, I have more ideas than I'll ever have time to write in my lifetime already. But it's the drudgery of having to sit down and try to get what's in my head onto the page. Then it gets into the reader's head, right? So that's why it's always important to have beta readers and people that can give you notes on it, because I know, again, what's inside this warped head of mine. But if it doesn't reach your head and scar you for life, then I haven't done my job. And so again, because I know, how it is, you always have to have a second set of eyes when editing too, right? Where it's like, I know that word, I could skip a whole word. When I read it back, my brain knows it's supposed to be there, so it fills it in. And it's like, you're blind to that. But when you get another set of eyes, they're like, I don't quite understand what you're trying to do here. I don't get this, or it's confusing, whatever, And then when you kind of hold the mirror up to it, or a microscope to it, then it's like, oh, okay, all right, well, this is what I'm trying to convey, but am I doing it? And I look at myself more as a storyteller, more so than a writer, because to me, it's all about the story. I'm trying to, weave a tale that evokes the emotion, typically horror, but, a lot of my stories too, by tapping into that emotion, that really separates you from the average writer who's just, here's a bunch of events that happened. Why did it happen? How does it affect the character? Do you really care about the character? So you have to care about them. So that way, when bad things happen to them, it hurts the reader as well. So for me, it's getting the story out. And again, the brainstorming process is my favorite part, right? I mean, just coming up with the ideas, that's the adrenaline rush. That's the high. Work comes in when you've got to actually put it down, get the right words, break out thesaurus.com or whatever to make sure you find just the right words. Like, does that word really mean what I think it means? Let me look at the dictionary. Because sometimes, you think an adjective means one thing, and really it's like, actually, that really doesn't quite mean. There's a word that's more precise, but it's that, the work of trying to get that so that it flows, so that the prose flows. That's kind of drudgery. So you have to go back in editing and, again, try and get the words to make sense. Because again, I know what's in my head, but, getting on the page and making sure it flows instead of saying, he did this, she did that, he did this, she did that, and it's like, that's boring, So then you got to look at sentence construction and stuff. And that's the work of writing for me.
So do you see yourself as more of a pantser or a plotter?
I'm a brainstormer. So I like to just let my mind go and come up with all these ideas for, again, the plotting and the characters, the story, hopefully, have that ending. And most of the time I have the ending in mind before I get there, because that helps you have a destination that you can work toward. And so once you can get those tentpole moments too, or those beats, as they say in the screenwriting world, then you have something to work towards, right? But to just completely pants and, like Stephen King or whatever, you sit down, I'll just write myself into it. I'm writing and like, oh, something happened. Oh, something's interesting here. Okay, let me pursue that, whatever. I think it wastes a lot of time. You end up doing way more editing that way. I think the best way to do it would be to outline, but that's a discipline, and not everyone's brain works that way either, right? So I start with just brainstorming as many ideas as I can. And then I go back and kind of organize that, kind of like a 3-act structure, right? Where, okay, this is the stuff that happens in Act 1. This is what would happen in Act 2. This is what happens in Act 3. Characters. Okay, here's each of my characters. So all those ideas I brainstorm about various characters, bits of dialogue, various events, things, descriptions about them, how they conflict with other characters. I have a character section. And so I'll just copy and paste all stuff. So then once I've done the brainstorming, which I guess is kind of pantsing, but it's not really writing, it's more pseudo writing, right? I'm just jotting down the ideas as they come and then try and organize them. And that's where you kind of start to form kind of an outline from that. And then again, you now have those stepping stones to get from one to the next to the next. And that's what helps, with the writing, as opposed to saying, okay, I did this, now what happens? And it's just completely wide open. Like, I don't know.
I think I heard it called once scaffolding, where it's not so much, it's not so much like outlining as much as, you just kind of have these, kind of, as you were saying, kind of going from a step to a step to a step. And so I think I've heard it, I said, called scaffolding before, where it's, that's, you have kind of the framework, but you don't really have all of the, how you're getting from point A to point B there yet. It's just all the structures there. You just got to fill in the blanks.
Right. And I used to work in IT. And so I did some application development, some programming code and stuff like that, where I would call it a pseudocode, where you basically said, this is going to happen. That's going to do this. You push the button, this happens. This agent runs or whatever. And so you go through and I just kind of write down the pseudocode of what's supposed to happen. It's not actual Java, JavaScript, or whatever code. It's just, these are the things that it needs to do. And then you go back and write the methods or whatever for each of those things. So I kind of look at like pseudocode as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. So you had said you had done screenwriting and then also, short stories and novel writing. Did you find that screenwriting helped in doing the novel writing, or two very different disciplines? Or, I guess, how would you kind of compare the two?
Yes. So each medium has its strengths, right? So when you think of screenwriting, it's very visual medium, right? So in that regard, to answer your question, that really helped me with my prose writing because I'm a very visual person. And so I've had people tell me they're reading my stories and it's like a movie's playing in their head. They can see exactly what's happening, which I think is fantastic. Now, the writing is very different. It's very terse, very tight. I mean, every word counts. So for me, that discipline where I started with a greeting card, a one-liner, it's one sentence, a couple sentences like that. And that really trained me to be able to distill an idea into a very, almost like like log lines. It really helps me doing log lines because I can describe, you're trying to tell me I need to describe, 100 or 100 plus page script in one sentence, or a 300, 400 page novel in a sentence or two. It's like, how do I distill it to its very essence? But if you can do that, then you really understand the idea, the story that you're telling. So my progression was kind of from the smallest to the largest, so micro to macro. So like I said, starting with greeting cards, one-liners, then I went to short stories. Again, aside from the screenwriting part, where again, very tight writing. So that really, the screenwriting helped me when I started writing short stories, because again, every word matters. It's like, you know how a submission call, it's like, it's got to be 3,000 words max, maybe 5,000 words, and so as a pantser, it's like, I don't know how they do that. They can ramble and, they have to cut it down. I mean, I have said some stories that I had one that was like 7,500 words. I had to cut down to 5,000. And then eventually I got it down to, I think, 4,000 or fewer. And that's painful, but you just got to find those moments where you can cut out redundancy in that. But yeah, it really trained me to be able to write visually, going from screenwriting to prose and being able to write that very concise, tight, every word matters really helped when I started writing short fiction.
Gotcha. All right. So next question I'm going to ask. So this is probably going to be a hard one because it's like picking your children. But of the books that you've written, what would you say is your favorite?
Okay. So right now, until my short story collection comes out officially, it would be Eye for an Eye. So Eye for an Eye came from two different novellas that I wrote. So it's basically a novella collection. And at the time I wrote them, I had no connection between the two. I started writing a short story that got out of hand. It's like, I don't know if you do this where you fall in love with the characters and the story world and you just don't want it to end. And you just want to keep writing and writing. Or some ideas are bigger than others where there's just so much more to it. And so it was after I'd written those, and it's getting easier now because I see more, especially self-published authors are writing novellas and self-publishing those. But if you want to sell those to a publishing house, that novellas have typically been really difficult to sell. So now I've got these two novellas that I've written, and it's like, well, what do I do with those? What market am I going to find for these? And then it hit me. Although the stories were very different, I mean, the first one, Committed, is about a 1950s housewife who suspects her husband's having an affair. And then she has to try and prove her suspicions and her sanity. Is he gaslighting her? Or is he really having an affair? Or is she going crazy like her mother? And so from that story, I mean, it has a great twist at the end, nice revenge tale. And then the second story, which is what the novella collection is named after, Eye for an Eye, is about two Gen Z college sophomores that are traveling cross country in their Prius to go to their Ivy League school from California to the East Coast. And they start to run out of fuel. And if you've ever taken a long road trip, you come across these intersections or crossways to nowhere. And you look and you're just like, okay, why is this even here? Right. I mean, this road has to lead somewhere, but I have no idea where it is. If you're going through like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, or you'll see these old dilapidated buildings that is like a ghost town. There used to be some people here, but not anymore. There's an old faded sign that says gas and grub, and you're like, well, there used to be a gas station here.
There was.
Yeah. So then you get desperate. You're like, I just have to pull over, right? Even though it's a Prius, it doesn't run on wind. You do have to put fuel in it, right? And in my research, I found out that once you get low enough of fuel and the battery gets low enough, it'll force the speed limit. You will not be able to drive over, say, 8 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour. It's like really, really low. And so then you're really freaking out, right? Because it's like, what's wrong with this thing? So anyway, they pull off and they discover that when you make the wrong decision in the wrong town, it could make the difference between life and death or something far worse. So that was inspired by a road trip I was on. And we stopped off in this really strange little town in Texas where there was just something off about all the people I saw, right? And I'm like, what is it about them? And so we spent a little bit of time there. And then it finally hit me, nobody had all their teeth, right? I mean, even like a young, attractive young gal that was working at, selling like DVDs at a little like flea market, whatever, she had like no teeth at all. I'm like, what is it about this town? Why is everybody missing some, if not all of their teeth? And of course, my twisted imagination. And then I thought of the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, from the Bible there. And it's like, okay, all right. And then boom, I got this idea. I'm like, great. But anyway, to come back to, Eye for an Eye, those two novellas both have a common theme of eye for an eye, right? So it's the revenge tales. So then I'm like, there's a link. And then when you go back and read the stories, there's other parallels that you come across, like just the eye, right? There's moments and images in both of those that deal with that without any spoilers. So Eye for an Eye, I just love that. But again, two very disparate protagonists, 1950s housewife versus Gen Z, both female-led characters, protagonists. I love that. But my new short story collection, I'm so excited because I've got 13 short stories that have been written over a span of easily 10 years that have been the majority have been published in various anthologies, but I think I have five, maybe six of them are all brand new that no one's seen before. And so there's such a variety and so many twisted tales in there that I'm just like, I can't wait to get that out there for people to read.
And you said that comes out in September?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, I don't have an exact date yet. Once I do, I'll be posting that on the socials. I'm having the art done now. I'm excited about that. I found a fantastic artist. I wanted to have, actually, Eye for an Eye, I designed the cover myself on that one, but I wanted to have it painted, but I didn't have a person to do that because I kind of like that aesthetic, kind of an oil painting. Because I love that kind of old pulp fiction style covers. So then I found a guy who's does fantastic work, and again, he uses acrylic, paints in acrylics, and I'm so excited to see what he comes up with for this.
Awesome! I can't wait to see it. And so, because that's September, I know this episode will be coming out in August, so the timing works out great for that. Then, so
I should have the cover art by then to start teasing that, and of course, I'm going to be at Books and Brews, which we're. You're there, right?
So I'm going as a volunteer. I'm not. Okay. I don't have a table set up.
Okay. Yeah. Same here. I'm not. I didn't get a table for this one either. But yeah. And of course, you and I met at Dark Drafts. Where are you going to Dark Drafts? The next one?
I am. I will be at the next one also. Yeah.
Yes. I have a table there.
I'm looking forward to it. Dark Drafts was really fun.
That was so great. That's where we met. So
yes. Yep.
Yeah, so that's such a great event. I mean, come on, it's a haunted brewery. What's not to love?
Right, it's just kind of tailor made to be a horror writing event. So yeah, it was a great venue, and I mean, it was a good fun couple of days. So all right, so shifting gears a little bit. So I started the Night Crew podcast as a spinoff to my own series, The Night Crew, which is about a team of monster hunters. My scripted episodes are deep dives into some kind of a creature. Right now, I'm doing a series on vampires. So one of the caveats, of coming on the podcast is you got to talk about your favorite monster. So, Mr. Prince, what is your favorite horror creature or monster?
It's interesting because over the years that's changed, right? My very first monster I would go with would be a vampire. I was really inspired by Tomb of Dracula, if you remember that old comic. I love that. Of course, Night Stalker, Salem's Lot, those things. Like I said, my very first short story I remember writing was about a vampire. But then I kind of got bored with that. And then, my inspiration young was the old EC comics, Tales from the Crypt. And they always, Vault of Horror, and they'd always have this hand jutting out of the soil of their grave and this corpse crawling up out of this soil and shambling towards somebody's house to give them the retribution they deserve because they're responsible for their death or whatever. So I love revenge tales like that where bad people get what they deserve. So then I went through a zombie phase. Went through an alien phase in that. But again, now there's been so much done since The Walking Dead, and 28 Days Later also. But I kind of got oversaturated with the zombie genre, where it's just like, okay. So I would say, if you ask me today, I would have to go with the clown. There's something, that kind of that uncanny valley where when you see a person who's, it's a person, or is it? But, whether it be like a mask that someone wears, but this is like almost like the mask is embedded in them, right? You've got the grease paint smile, but if you look at the eyes, it belies the smile. So deep down, they either have ill intent, malicious, maybe a murderous intent, if you look in their eyes, or maybe they're just deeply, deeply disturbed or sad. And that contradiction between that painted on smile and what's going on behind that. So that's, like I mentioned, my next novel is, again, all going to be very clown centric. And it saddens me a bit because I had this idea, like I said, before the whole clown craze started. I think it was in England, where, there's just some random clown standing on a street corner in the woods or whatever, freaking people out, And again, I had this idea inspired by a termite tent, right? It had nothing to do with any of that. But now people can look at it and go, oh, you got that idea from Clown in the Cornfield, or you got that idea from it or whatever, like, no, man, I had this idea long before that, But it's a very unusual, unique take on what is a clown. Okay. So, I'm hoping to basically rewrite or to define your understanding of what is a clown. So, I mean, again, in a dream world, I will do for clowns what Night of the Living Dead did for zombies. Right. I mean, that's my my high ultimate goal. You know, whether I achieve that or not, that's another story. But so, yeah, I would have to say if I had to choose the monster that I love the most, that disturbs me the most, I'd have to go with the clown right now.
To go with the clown, which is interesting because you think of horror creatures. I mean, clowns are scary, but I don't know if necessarily off the top of my head I would have thought clowns as a horror. I mean, outside of like It, but even It is like there's behind the scenes. It's not really a clown. It's that's just the persona he's taking on.
Exactly. That's one of the issues I take with It, or at least people's interpretation of it. Yeah, it's all about the clown. It's like, that is not it. He's this ancient evil who will manifest as your greatest fear. But when he manifests as a clown, there are so many coulrophobes out there that, I mean, people that are paralyzed when they see a clown. I remember going to the Orange County Fair in California, one of my daughters, and there was a clown, and we're walking, la la la. All of a sudden, he comes like right up to her and says, "Hey, how you doing? You're here for some fun or something like that." My daughter's like, "What?"
All right, so I'm gonna make you say that word again. What was the word for the fear of clowns?
It's coulrophobia. Coulrophobia.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that you know that off the top of your head. I would have to Google that to have known. I would say that's kind of awesome that you knew off the top of your head what the fear of clowns is.
Like I said, I've done a ton of research, and over the years on this idea. Like I said, it's evolved to such. I mean, it's so detailed, and that was one of the things too that's kind of put me off from or delayed me writing it, is because the idea just kept getting bigger and bigger, and it's like, wow. So that's like when I write the first book, do I need to have the second and third books in mind? So I already have ideas of where each of those are going to go. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, well, then at the end of that, I could see a spinoff series going on from there, And so then I'm like, oh, and I could keep that in mind too, So it almost became so daunting because the scope was so large that I was intimidated, to say like, man, can I do this? So now having, published so much and, short fiction and, novella length, again, written a number of screenplays and that it's now I feel, that I'm ready for that challenge.
Awesome. All right. So if you had to, what would be your favorite movie that would be scary clown oriented?
So
more like Killer Clown person, a Killer Clown from Outer Space kind of person? Or?
I met the Kyoto brothers in LA at a couple different events at Monsterpalooza and some others. And they're just hilarious, great guys. So yes, I love Killer Clowns from Outer Space, but there are some more disturbing, because that one's very tongue in cheek, almost slapstick, right?
Right. Well, with you kind of being that comedy horror, that kind of. So that's why Killer Clowns was the first thing that kind of came to mind, was because of that. That from our earlier conversation about comedy with horror, and that definitely is one that definitely bleeds the two together.
100%, yeah, and I absolutely love that. I mean, I love it, seen it, have the T-shirts, right? I have even have the little cotton candy gun, in Spirit.
That's
Halloween
awesome.
Came out with those. I had to get that. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally love that. But I'll give you some others that, and I don't know if you're a fan of, I'm a big fan of black and white film. I think growing up as a kid watching like Saturday afternoon horror host in Michigan, it was Sir Graves Ghastly. Yeah. And, but they would always, they always on a cheap budget, or the Ghoul. They had that low budget where they just got a bunch of almost public domain or super cheap movies and that. But it was, black and white stuff. And there's just something disturbing about that monochromatic vision of life where it's just, again, kind of uncanny valley. It's people and they're, it's life, but it's just a gray version of that, right? So that's, I don't know, black and white films just really disturb me. But I even love like some of the old silent films. My absolute favorite actor is Lon Chaney Sr.
Thousand Faces.
My gosh, if you look at his catalog, one of the most horrific scenes in cinema is the reveal of the Phantom of the Opera. I mean, I still have yet to see its equal, right?
Right.
But
Well,
if you go back before that, there is The Man Who Laughs, right? And which was just him as a clown. But before that, there's a very obscure one called He Who Gets Slapped. Have you heard of that one?
I have not.
If you saw the picture, you've probably seen it posted where it's just the most disturbing, terrifying clown. So look that up. He Who Gets Slapped. And he is actually the name of this clown. Or Laugh Clown Laugh. I'm sorry. Laugh Clown Laugh, I think was the one that people are more familiar with. But this predated that. And it's the most disturbing clown, hands down, that you will ever see. So those are the ones that, most of, the clown stuff that you see now is basically a serial killer wearing makeup or wearing a mask or whatever, so there's lots of that going around. Again, I'm looking at a completely unique take on that. As a matter of fact, in my short story collection, I have a fun one story. So I have actually a few because I love, vintage, golden age circus and circus sideshow stuff. So, oh my gosh, I love that stuff. I've got some cool collectible stuff, some cabinet cards and things from that era that, I just love that. So I have some short stories in that collection coming up that have circus sideshow and tales and stuff. And I have one that's also kind of a fun imagining of where do clowns come from. And this is just one of those weird ideas that just popped in my head one day when I looked at a bright red balloon and my brain says, oh, is that a clown seed? So could that balloon hatch and become, and it hatches like clowns. You got this little fetus that forms inside it. So you get this clown that hands a balloon to a little kid and they don't think anything of it. And they take the balloon home and next thing you know, the thing starts wobbling and stuff. And this starts to hatch.
It circles back to our conversation about inspiration.
Exactly. Where did these warped ideas come from? It's like, I saw a balloon one day. There you go. There's the seed for a story.
It was a balloon.
Story.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. It kind of looks like an egg when you think about it, right?
They actually kind of do. Now that I don't think I'll look at balloons the same again. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really, my job here is done. I think Stephen King calls it resonance, but my greatest thrill is if I can take something, mundane and then warp it so that you never think of that the same way again. So it's kind of like, Psycho did for showers and Jaws did for the beach, right? If I can do that with my stories and I have people, my wife and other people that come back and it's a character or something, and they do callbacks, and they're like, so now whenever they see that, they're like, thank you very much for putting that in my head, Brian.
You're like, you're welcome. All right. So outside of writing, what are your other hobbies? What do you enjoy doing?
I love hockey. So that's I did play, and I just a huge hockey fan. During hockey season, I never miss a Detroit Red Wings game. My wife and I, even for the last several years, would go to Traverse City, Michigan for the Red Wings training camp and watch the prospects and the team train and everything, and just love that. But right now it's just time-wise, there's only so much time. Like I said, how do you find time to write, or how do you manage writing? And it's like, you have to just kind of cut out so many things to prioritize the writing. So for me, it's about reading, writing, watching movies. That, again, is my passion. But outside of that, I have to say probably hockey.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I live down here in Texas. So hockey is not as big down here in Texas, but
you're in Dallas.
Well, yeah, I think there's a team there, I think. Yeah.
It's about football. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. Hockey, that's that sport they play on the ice that, I bust my ass every time I step onto. And yeah. So
should avoid that at all costs.
All right. So kind of wrapping up, where can, I'm still new at this. So where can both of my listeners, learn more about you, find your books, that kind of stuff?
Okay. The best way probably would be go to bdprints.com. that will actually redirect you to my Amazon authors page for now. I also, if you go to ghastlypress.com, you can get signed copies of my books through there. On social media, you could post those links.
I'll put all these links in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm most active on Facebook, but on the other social medias, I'm at Clown Prince B, as in Brian, at Clown Prince B. So that's on Instagram and X and TikTok. So the most important things will usually get posted to those. But like I said, Facebook, I put all kinds of crazy fun stuff that I just find humorous or disturbing and put out there.
They're one and the same.
Yeah, it just depends how you look at it. I have a number of book signing events. I mean, October is really filling up. I'll be at Imaginarium in July. I think I mentioned that. So I'm excited about that. I'll be doing a couple of panels. One is on horror. It'll be on Friday evening. I'll be one of the panelists. And then I also was tagged to be a moderator on a panel on anthologies. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And like I said, I got a lot of different book signing events coming up. So I keep wanting to post a list of all these, but I keep adding new ones. So like I said, October is super busy. I'm starting to add some in September and November as well. But that's always great. Like I said, I will be cruising around Books and Brews. So you can find me there. And so, I think that's the best ways to find me.
Awesome. And like I said, we'll have all the links for any link that you send me. I will make sure they end up in the show notes. So, as you're listening, and if you want to find BD Prince and any of his books, then you'll be able to find those in the links, as well as where you can follow him on all the socials. So with that, I appreciate you hanging out and chat with me for a little bit. Look forward to seeing you at Books and Brews and also at Dark Drafts. This,
it's going to be epic.
Well, thanks for sticking around and chatting.
Always a pleasure, Brian. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right. Thanks. That's it for the Night Crew podcast and my conversation with BD Prince. A huge congratulations to BD. During the episode, he talked about his screenplay Boondocks. Since the recording, it won Best Long Format Screenplay at Imaginarium 2025. I have links to where you can find BD in the show notes. Follow him on all the socials and definitely pick up his works. So, if you had a good time, make sure to follow the show. Please share it with a friend and leave a rating. Hopefully 5 stars. And if you want updates on my writing, you can follow me on Facebook or TikTok at Bradrick's Author. You can find copies of my novels wherever you like to buy books. But if you hop over to my website, bradricks.com, you can purchase signed copies of any of my novels. While there, also sign up for my newsletter. Remember, The Night Crew Book 1 is currently available, and Book 2 comes out in November. I'm Brad Ricks, reminding you to stay out of graveyards after dark, question people who don't show up in mirrors, and remember to find a little comedy amongst the horror. Until next time, keep your curtains drawn, your sense of humor sharp, and your blood inside your body. Thanks for listening.